Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Got a special guest this time. It's Jammie Ward. He's a big star on the WrestleCopia podcast network. We're going to find out all about him and what he's up to. And once again, Bob and Joe, they go toe-to-toe on the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Enjoy it with your favorite libation. Well, hello, everybody. This is Bob Smith once again. You may remember me from Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a whole bunch of wrestling magazines in the 80s and 90s. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. It's a Saturday afternoon. I hear my neighbors arguing upstairs, but I just happen to be talking to Joe Puccio at the same time. I'm speaking to you from Chateau Smith here in Queens, New York, dialing into Long Island to Joe Puccio. Joe, how are you? How's it going?
I'm doing great, Bob. I'm getting ready to go out for a few hours tonight.
Well, Saturday night as we talk, you should go out.
Real quick, I organized a little mini high school reunion tonight. This was a few months back that I did this. I said, let me just throw it out there. I reached out to a bunch of people I haven't seen in years. Tonight's the night, and I guess we'll see what the turnout is like. I'm looking forward to it. Hey, look, even if there's 2 people or if there's 12 people or if there's 30 people, I'm planning on having a good time. So it should be interesting.
You know what I want to do? And we did this a year after. We did this a year or two after Peter Boy left New York. We had a reunion and all the writers and editors, or as many as could come. I'd love to do it now just to see who would show up and how everybody's doing. It's been a long time, It would be a fun thing to do. But reunions are always great. I love reunions. I love high school reunions. Not that I ever go, but I went to one a few years ago and we had a wonderful time. It was great. Hold on one second. I just got a book in the mail today, and this is the truth. Hold on. I just got a book in the mail, and it came. I got a notice in my email box that said, you have a UPS package coming. I didn't order anything. And then I thought, oh, I'll bet I know what this is. And because it said it was from Simon & Schuster, and this is a brand new book from ECW Press coming out. It's either out or it's going to come out. It's called Bigger, Better, Badder, WrestleMania 3 and the Year It All Changed by the one and only Keith Elliott Greenberg. That's right. And I just skimmed through it, and I'm going to devour this later on because it's what I've read in depth so far. It's just meticulously researched look at, it's true. The year it all changed. The era of the mega card started with really more of WrestleMania 3 than WrestleMania 1 in my eyes. Because number 1 was at the Garden. Number 3 was the announced crowd of 93,000 at the Silverdome, Pontiac, Michigan. So it ushered in the era of the super duper duper card, the major event, football stadium. What do you think?
Yeah. First of all, about that book, I'm well aware of it because it's on my radar. About a month ago, I got a press release from ECW Press, and that was on there. And I reached out to try to maybe set something up with Keith, do an interview of sorts about the book. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting that and talking to him about it. Yeah, he's a very well known writer too. He's written a bunch of stuff.
He was the WWE book writer for years.
Yep.
And now he's stepped away outside of it, and it is meticulously researched. Tons of quotes.
Yeah.
Factoids. Not only, again, this is what makes a good wrestling book writer. It's not just about that event. It's every other federation is listed.
Yeah.
All the people, they talk about the AWA, they talk about Pro Wrestling USA, if you remember that, attempt to compete with Vince McMahon. From what I've glanced at so far, it looks like it's going to be super duper. And I'm gonna tell people that it is coming out. If by the end of the show I can figure out what the release date is, I will announce it at the end of the show. But bigger, better, better with a fantastic illustration of Hogan and Andre glaring at each other on the cover. It's this is going to be a big deal. This book's pretty cool. And who doesn't remember WrestleMania 3? I mean, my gosh.
I still think of it as the biggest one, even though in many ways it's been surpassed with different different types of ways of looking at it as far as money, revenue, ratings, things like that. And yeah, as far as what you said, it's kind of funny because the first WrestleMania was obviously so big because it was WrestleMania. It was at the Garden, and it was the first one. The inaugural was always the big one. And then WrestleMania 2, they tried to sort of amp it up because if you remember, they did it from 3 different locations.
Right.
I think Chicago, New York, and LA. And then WrestleMania 3, they went even bigger. They did it at the stadium, and it was, even though it's an inflated figure, that 93,173 figure that they've spouted for many years. And then it's like they really couldn't, and then it's almost like from there, they didn't know where to go. Because WrestleMania 4, if you think about it, they went to Trump Plaza, and they did a tournament, which was kind of not that well received. It was kind of a little for a WrestleMania. I don't know about that. So it's kind of funny.
It's funny to this day. Everybody talks about WrestleMania 1 and 3, but nobody talks about 2 and 4.
Nobody talks about 2. I know it's interesting.
No.
2 gets lost in the shuffle a lot.
But then they have a bunch of football players in that one too, and some kind of a battle royal or something. And you see, here's the deal. This shows my selective memory. When I wasn't fond of something, I forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that show, and I wasn't entertained by it. I thought it looked forced. The matchups weren't as exciting to me. There was the freshness in just 1 year seemed to dissipate. I'm sure it did well, but it's not held in high regard by historians or fans that I know of.
Well, if you look at the main event, I mean, it was Hogan and King Kong Bundy in a steel cage, which it's a quality match in the sense that, it was just a big heel being fed to Hogan like they were doing at the time. And a steel cage match back then was a lot more popular than it would be today. Today, it's kind of just old hat. But I think I always felt the 3 locations was a little strange because, you didn't really have the matches weren't really that long in the first place. And they didn't really have that many great matches in the first place on that show. So, I mean, to split it up between 3 locations, I think they pretty much realized, or Vince realized after he did that it was a failure. Because if you look at it, did they ever do that again? I mean, I think that was the only time. So they probably realized, they give it a shot, but it's best to do it at one location. And obviously now it's the two days.
Point number one, I'm thinking as a fan, from a fan perspective, I'm going, why would I want to pay a ticket to see 3 or 4 matches and then watch a screen?
Exactly.
But at the same time, if you go to WrestleMania and sit in the upper deck, you're not looking at the ring, you're looking at the screens. Because you're so far up in the air, they look like what I call bugs on a Triscuit. It's like you can hardly see the ring. So that's point number one. Point number 2 is this. As far as WrestleMania 2 goes, it was Bundy Hogan. Everybody thought that Andre had a shot against Hogan. Nobody thought that Bundy had a shot against Hogan. Andre had a shot. Nobody was picturing King Kong Bundy with a belt around his waist.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
Nobody who really thought Bundy was going to beat Hogan. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Hogan had a lot of opponents. I know Hogan had a lot of opponents where people would show up knowing he was going to win, but that's what they wanted.
Uh-huh.
The good guy fandom at that era, a lot of kids, they wanted to see their hero emerge victorious after he's been fouled and has a second comeback match or something like that. But very rarely did Hogan get in the ring with somebody that people thought would beat him. And playing devil's advocate, I do believe that people thought the Ultimate Warrior could beat him.
And at WrestleMania 6, 100%. I mean, that was, I think, split down the middle as far as who was going to win. I mean, you really didn't know who was going to win. You really didn't know which way they were going to go. And I remember being surprised at the result. I really thought Hogan was going to take it.
But didn't Hogan take a little sabbatical at that point? I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah.
But I will say the original Hogan run, the good guy, run was, for me, felt interminable. Number one, in terms of wrestling style, we don't know what Hogan was. I just got tired of watching it. It was the same thing every match. The blown up comeback, he gets the tar knocked out of him for 4.5 minutes, and he starts shaking like a leaf and moving his hands up and down and grimacing and doing that old man Walter Brennan strut that he would do before he would do the point.
Yeah.
And then it would be then it would be kick to the face, leg drop time, over and over and over again. Rarely was there a roll up in a Hulk Hogan match.
Isn't it crazy how things that we look back at now and we think how simple they were and how, a lot of ways kind of infantile, like how they got over so well. I mean, it was a different time. I mean, it didn't take as much to get over back then. It's a little different now. Now everyone is just like picking apart every little thing. But back then it's like you didn't really have to do much to get over.
No, but you know something? As I sit here thinking about it, I have to give current WWE credit because I have seen roll-ups and simple pins that weren't finishers probably 5 times in the last 8 or 9 weeks. Like a reversal or just a sneak pinfall, that type of thing, or somebody pinned against the ropes and somebody hold the bottom rope. It's different. It's not the same thing over and over again. That's what you're looking for, a little bit of variety in these matches.
Yeah,
If somebody and there's the deal. I mean, I've always thought that relying on the finishing move, I can only win with this move, makes no sense. If you're beating the living tar out of somebody who's laying there prone, why don't you just try to pin him? But there's the thing. I'm trying to inject real reality and common sense into something that really makes no sense.
Well, that's the issue. I mean, in and of itself, the entire aspect of a wrestling match, you could really pick it apart, right? So much of it doesn't make sense. The part that I always thought was really funny as I got older and I started to watch it with a bit of a different, more cynical point of view, where you say like, why when one wrestler throws the other wrestler into the ropes, why is he turning around and bouncing and going back to his opponent? I mean, why doesn't he just get out of there?
Yeah, the Irish whip makes no sense. It makes no sense. Right. I mean, supposedly it's your momentum that's carrying you off the rope to bound back toward your opponent. But if that's the case, why not just grab the rope while you're right next to it and stop the momentum?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that makes sense. Nobody wants that. It's funny. WWE has a new show coming up. I think when the Undertaker and Mickey James and stuff like that are having a contest to see who can win this contest. I think it's going to be an A&E. I think
it started, I believe, a week or so ago.
And I'm looking at the promos for it, and I'm like, this looks interesting. But even in the promo of them teaching maneuvers, I look at one, I'm going, who would do that in a real fight? But that's wrestling. It's what we've been conditioned to look at. I mean, how many old school scientific versus bad guy prelim matches did we watch? Let's say it was Tony Garea versus Joe Turco.
Uh-huh.
And in every one of those matches, if the opponent had any type of limberness in the rope, they would do the rope cross.
Right.
Remember the rope cross? They were all skidding in back 2 different directions, bounding off the rope. And then sometimes they'd smash you. Other times they'd just stop.
Yeah.
Point.
Yeah. I always got a kick out of that.
One guy would point to his head. The bad guy usually would point to, I'm smarter than you because I didn't get beat up.
Yeah.
No, you're smarter than he is because that's what you're supposed to do in a real fight. But remember that they were just they weren't whipping each other off the rope.
No, they were just crisscrossing. They were crisscrossing and they were missing each other. So they just kept like running past each other, and they can do it, for like two or three reps.
But here's the funny point. As dumb as that is, I always enjoyed that spot. I always liked that spot. Yeah. Yeah.
It was entertaining. Yeah.
It was entertaining. And usually somebody would stop or do this little skip around so he would, stop running toward the guy. Oh, man. There's some memories. I haven't seen that spot in ages.
You're right.
Isn't it amazing how certain spots you don't see, like the side headlock? Whoever puts a side headlock on their opponent, male or female competitor, I got to get them on the show to thank them. Because you know what? Side headlock looks real. An armbar looks real. A leg lock looks real. That's the stuff I kind of like.
Yeah, what about
armbars are taught by police.
Yeah.
As a way of subduing somebody.
I know.
So, it's like it makes sense. It's logical. It's wrestling. It's actually what wrestling is to hold an opponent in such a way that they can't move or have to give up.
I'll give you 2 moves that you don't really see anymore. Something as simple as a hip toss. You don't really see hip tosses as much anymore, and you don't see atomic drops.
Like the Backlund move?
Like, you kind of
or the atomic drop off the top rope. Did they refer to that as the atomic drop? Because they referred to Backlund's thing as an atomic drop too. I think there were I think two different organizations called it a different thing. For instance, like you say, the bound off the top onto the prone person below, like ass first.
Right,
That's an
right.
atomic drop to you, right?
Well, that I'm really talking like, you kind of like you have the guy the back the guy's back is to you, and
Mhm.
you kind of like pick him up,
Yeah,
and then
that's the back. Okay, that is the
and then you
backward move. Okay, yeah.
yeah, and then you slam him down, yeah, like sort of like with your knee, between
It
his
becomes
legs.
sort of like a standing backbreaker.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
goes prone, not knowing what hit him. He gets pinned. That was Backlund's big move.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right. Nobody uses that anymore.
yeah. These are some moves. They just I don't know what happens. They just kind of die out, and
But
I don't
some
know.
don't. Some don't. The Samoan move that the Wild Samoans used to use. The Samoan, they kick back and just slam the guy after holding him prone over the shoulders.
Oh
That
yeah,
move is
yeah,
all over the place. They still
yeah,
use that move.
yeah.
What else is still used? That's a good question. What else is still used today that used to be used all the time?
That's true. What
A
about
lot
even
more
like
unenforced punching now. I'll put it that way. Everybody punches now.
super kicks are way, way overused now.
Chops to the chest are used.
I'm not a fan of the chops to the chest at all. Like I feel like that move is so overdone, and it's okay if there's a couple of them in the match, but I can't stand when they literally the guys just go back and forth for like 5 minutes saying I can chop you, now you chop me, and they're like putting their chest up, like basically daring his opponent to do it. It's like
Mhm.
why? Like why are you daring somebody to chop you in the chest? It's just
Do you remember
it's a strange one.
do you remember the spot a few WrestleManias ago? Actually, it's more than a few now. I think it was Logan Paul on one side of the ring, and it was either Ricochet or Kofi Kingston on the other. I don't remember which it was. Forgive me. Forgive me, fans who know everything. All right. They're almost standing on opposite side, goading each other, and they both jumped to the top rope, flew across the ring, and blasted into each other right at ring center.
That
A
does ring a bell.
phenomenal athletic achievement. I've never seen anything quite like it. People lambast Logan Paul, but he was part of that.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
amazing. You remember the spot?
I do, and I'm also not remembering who the opponent was.
I know it was either Ricochet or
Wasn't
Kofi.
it wasn't Sami Zayn?
No, Sami
No,
Zayn couldn't do
no,
that. Sami Zayn is another one I don't get. I'm sorry, I don't get it. I don't
not a
get it.
fan.
No, I don't get it. I don't think. What does he do that's really spectacular? And secondly, does he look big enough to beat anybody?
Well, that's a yeah. I mean, the size thing is a bit of a different story, but
But what?
I have
Which
to
leads
admit,
me
like,
to my next point. Orange Cassidy is Sami Zayn on Quaaludes.
yeah. I mean, I can't. I'm not going to say. All right, so Sami Zayn. I'm not crazy about his character in WWE. I'll be
It's
honest,
all talk. It's talky. It's like
but I
that
will
whiny.
say I was a huge fan of his in Ring of Honor when he was El Generico.
Well, there you go. I didn't have a lot of exposure to that. I would like to see that.
I mean, that's where he cut his teeth with in the feud with Kevin Owens when Kevin Owens was Kevin Steen. It was Kevin Steen and Generico. They were a great tag team for years, and then they feuded. And I remember I believe I was at their final match at the Hammerstein Ballroom. I think it was the final battle pay-per-view for ROH years ago, and that match was just incredible. I mean, just incredible. It's a match I wouldn't mind seeing again. Pulling up on video or wherever it is. But yes, I was a huge fan of his back then. Now he had the mask on back then, so it was completely different. It's you can't even compare the two as far as characters go because he didn't speak and he had a mask on. As far as Orange Cassidy, I can't say I'm the biggest Orange Cassidy fan, but I do. I'll admit I do get entertained by some of his antics in the ring. There are times when I get a kick out of some of the stuff he does. He's pretty clever in the way he gets over. I didn't think it would get over when he first debuted in AEW, and he really has. I mean, you got to give him credit. I mean, he's pretty over with that fan base. Uh oh, I put Bob
I'm
to sleep.
sorry. Nudge me. Nudge me. Get the dog off my lap. What's going on? Oh, hi, Joe.
How you doing, Bob?
Yeah, I'm fine other than the fact I nodded out for a second. Oh,
Yeah,
God. No, I don't agree with you at all. I
about
think
both about
I think
Orange.
no, I think Orange is in the front to everything professional wrestling is and should be, and I don't like it at all. At all.
Okay.
At all. I can't even quantify what he does. I'm sorry. That's one of the reasons why I'm not an AEW supporter, because it's like it's so effing fake. I'm sorry. I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
I know it's the
I mean,
suspension of disbelief has been torn asunder by today's younger, smarter people. But the fact is, it's just a joke. It's just a joke character. I don't have any tolerance for it. I just don't. I'm sure he's probably put a good match in once in a game. He looks like an athlete.
yeah,
But I wasn't around to watch it because I don't give a frig.
that's fair.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, AEW fans. Look, I do watch more AEW than someone wearing long pants should. But it's just how I feel about it. Stop offending me. Stop offending anybody that's got one gray hair. That's a really good point. I think that's the way I'm looking at it. Anybody who grew up and learned wrestling, whether you're working in the business or just a fan, you had a sensibility about pro wrestling always was, that suspension of disbelief. And when you take that away completely, I got no use for you. End the story. Period. I don't care. That's why this is the outdated wrestling hour, Joe. Because I'm not buying a lot of stuff today. I'm just not. It's like it literally offends me. Plus, how can you take a championship seriously in an organization where you have comedy matches on 3 spots in every card? I rest my case.
Look, you're making sense. It's fair, but I would sort of refute that by saying I agree with that aspect, but I feel like WWE has a lot of zaniness and comedy, even still to this day. I mean, guys like
Otis?
Otis, yeah, people like that. I mean, I kind of cringe when I watch him on the show doing those skits backstage, or R-Truth, who is literally just on.
For
I
comedy
believe he was on last night, or I believe
He
he
was
was
on.
on.
He was on the show before we recorded with LA Knight in the tag
Right.
match.
Yeah, he did that, which, I mean, R-Truth, it's like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I get it. I mean, it's comic relief, but I feel like they have enough of that as well. And I just think there's got to be a happy medium. Yes, I think it can't be too much, can't be too little on the show. But I feel like they do the same thing.
And I totally agree. Which brings us back to the WrestleMania where Sami Zayn took on Johnny Knoxville in an absolute affront of a joke of a match. I
Exactly.
rest my case a third time.
But I agree with that too. And that's what I'm not, I'm not challenging you on that contention. I'm just saying that I feel like it's not just in AEW, that I also don't like too much comedy when they go too much out on a limb. But I feel like it's not just them. I feel like, WWE does it as just as much,
Oh, but you know what hurts worse than both? If you look at a tape of an indie card and they try to do comedy, oh my word, it's never good.
No, very, very rarely.
Anyway, wrestling's changed. What are we going to do? I got to take what they've served because I'm not going to stop watching it. I'm even going to watch AEW from time to time, despite my own best interests. You know what? I need something to grouse about. I'm old. Get off my lawn.
It'll give us something to talk about.
I'm old. That's why I come on the show the next week and go, did you see this guy eat a goldfish? Wait a minute. That was Moondog Lonnie Main. Wait a minute. Did you see this guy chew broken glass? Whoops. That was Moondog Lonnie Main from 1970s. Oh, did you see this guy have a cinder block crushed over his head? Whoops, that was the Mighty Igor, 1971. So you see, dumb stuff was always around. I am the first to admit it.
That is true. That is true. When you said that, I'm conjuring up images of the wild Samoans eating a raw fish. Talking to
they ate a raw fish once? Did they really?
Yeah.
I didn't see that one.
They used to have raw fish and just like tearing apart like a raw chicken and things like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's just great. You know what? Oh, Abdullah used to eat raw chicken on the air too, and he ate a fly once. He caught out of the air and he ate the fly. It looked really fake, but he ate the fly anyway. And there was who else ate something? Oh, Sika, the Wild Samoans, on a televised match in the late 70s, ate Lou Albano's cigar.
Really? I don't remember that one.
Just ate. It didn't. It was on the B show.
Oh, okay.
And Bruno went, "Get out of here." Or something like that, or come on now, because Bruno got offended at anything that was that ridiculously out of place.
Yeah. And
On
he wasn't afraid to admit it.
And Sika looked like he broke character, to be honest with you. He was kind of smiling like, I can't believe I just did that. I may still have that videotape. I'm not sure, but I there's something I really need to do. Go through my old videotapes collection and at least rediscover the gems I have that nobody else has. And I got to find that amazing Coco Goro commercial during wrestling where Hermione can go dance with some male dancers. She's like 90 dancing with these body beautiful guys. Classic. And the old Meineke muffler commercials in Carvel. This is Tom Carvel. You know what? My guy sounds a lot like Tom, doesn't he? Tom Carvel, it's 4th of July heritage cake. Or, whatever it is. Do you remember the Carvel ads with Tom Carvel in the East?
100%. 100%. I missed those commercials. They were great.
Look at this. And it's not even any creativity. It's Fudgy the Whale. It's Pookie the Ghost, whatever it was. It was just,
Cookie Puss.
Cookie Puss. Yeah, he's got ice cream cone for nose, kids. You see that?
No, but I
love that era, boy. I just do.
I never had you mentioned Carvel, but like as much as I used to hear those commercials and watch those commercials when I was a kid, I actually up until a few years ago had never had a Fudgy the Whale.
So you had a Fudgy the Whale?
Well, then a few years ago, my sister and brother-in-law were coming over to celebrate my birthday, and they knew my wife told them that I never had one, and they were like, "Oh, let's go buy one." And they actually came over and they brought a Fudgy for my birthday cake. So I had my first Fudgy when I was in my mid-40s.
Okay, that's okay. 2 questions. Number 1, how'd you like Fudgy?
I liked Fudgy, but I can't say I was blown away by Fudgy.
Okay, this next question. How does the fact that you've never had Fudgy the Whale come up in any conversation?
I mean, when I get together with my family, we're just talking about very, very, very random stuff.
That's my wife talking to somebody going, Bob never had a schnauzer. And then I show up, there's a schnauzer there. It's how did it come up?
I don't know. We just talk about everything. And, now that I think about it, even though I've had Fudgy now, I don't think I've ever had a Cookie Puss. So maybe I should,
I've never had, to be honest, I don't think I've never had either, but the classic Carvel cake.
Those are awesome.
Frozen. Oh, yeah. They're awesome.
They're the best cakes.
One of the 10 most delicious things on the planet. I don't care.
The crunchies.
The crunch. And when they're just a little hard with the softness of the frosting. Oh, it's baby.
So good.
Oh, it's good. Nothing better than a Carvel. Tom, we miss you, man. You made wrestling fun for me back in the 1970s. Because when you were on WOR, I know that Carvel advertised, and it was great. And I know you got to get out of here. You have an appointment, so I'm going to let you go. We will be right back with a really interesting fellow, Mr. Jammie Ward, right after this. Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia podcast network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years goes by. Get the breakdown, hear never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them, hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes name for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Othership podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the Othership. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons and take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. This is a guest on my show that everybody says I ought to have a guest on my show. This gentleman right here. His name is Jammie Ward. I think you all know him because he's been around the podcast block a time or two, and we're proud to have him on our show. A fellow WrestleCopia podcaster. It's Jammie Ward. How are you?
Hello, Bob. It is distinctly my honor to appear on your show. This is kind of like a dream come true.
Why would you say that? I'm just a wrestling schlub like everybody else is. I mean, come on.
Exactly. You're a schlub. I'm a schlub. Schlubs should hang with schlubs.
All right. That sounds good to me.
And I've hung with a lot of wrestling schlubs. Yeah. And because I go back almost as far as you do. I love wrestling. You love wrestling. So we should probably have a good time here.
Well, let's rewind that clock a little bit because you look like a young buck to me. No, not one of those young bucks, but you know what I mean. What's your first memory of wrestling? Mine is 1970, my friend, when I first got into wrestling. How about you?
My first memory of wrestling, I'm going to guess, is probably 1976. Just happened to be watching television on a Sunday night, 10 years old. Here is Stan Hansen giving an interview how he's going to kill Bruno Sammartino, and he's standing there complete with a tombstone. And I'm guessing that was probably a build-up for the Shea Stadium show. And then I kind of drifted away from wrestling until 1978. Cable television came into my neighborhood right outside of Philadelphia. They had a channel called Prism, which I'm sure you and a lot of the listeners are familiar with. And they had the live Spectrum Wrestling cards. And that hooked me back into wrestling. Not that I was ever real tight with it. I'm basically a fan from January of 1978 up till this day.
There you go. That's great. Yeah, I just remember flipping channels just like every other kid. I'm about 12 years old, and we had a show. We had the old Peter Martinez, NWF from Buffalo, Cleveland. They promoted in Albany. I'm from upstate New York originally, and I got hooked on that show from the first time I saw it. And I don't think I missed an episode of wrestling, if I could avoid it, probably for the next 20 years after that. I was really, really into it. Getting the job with PWI was a wonderful fluke. I mean, my whole life has been very, very lucky in that regard. But I want to know more about you, because I've been listening to you on the Othership podcast. Tell us about that and any other podcasting work you're up to right now, or anything else you're doing.
The Othership podcast is one of two podcasts that I appear pretty regularly on. The Othership podcast is more than just wrestling. It's like a pop culture podcast. In the past, they've had shows that talked about their favorite TV episodes, their favorite Christmas TV episodes, their favorite Saturday morning cartoon shows, and other TV stuff. They also will have episodes about food, such as food you can't get any longer, foods from McDonald's, or even something off the shelf. That was a very entertaining episode. I was a fan of theirs before I actually was welcomed aboard the Othership. As I like to say, I got beamed onto the Othership about 2 years ago, and I just enjoy. We record just about every Tuesday night. But again, I'm not on usually the episodes that don't deal with wrestling, but it's just an array of subjects. I'll have ones where they talk about rock music or rap or 80s punk or 90s alternative music. These guys are just into everything. Michael Herrick, Drew Samuels, Chris Spiker, William Merriweather. They're well-versed in a lot of subjects. And even when I'm not on, I'm always listening to their show. The guys are very entertaining.
I hope everybody there takes this as a compliment, but that is one whack podcast. I mean that as a compliment, because you never know what you're going to hear from week to week. And I like variety, and that's one of the WrestleCopia ones I'm really getting hooked on, because it's like there's nothing else like it out there. It's very, very unique.
You just described their podcast perfectly. Very unique, and they're all really nice guys. Basically, who they are, they're all podcast listeners of Brian Last's Arcadian Vanguard Network, and most specifically Breaking Kayfabe with Jeff Baldwin and Barry Rose. And after one of Barry Rose's CWF Legends Fan Fest, all these guys who had seen their names of each other on Facebook and had interacted in their fan groups all finally got to meet each other, and they've all become legitimate, really good friends. And they've welcomed me into their fold. I'm a little bit older than all of them are, and they all call me Uncle Jamie. Or they just, and when we record, they just call me Unc. I don't remember last time any of them actually just called me Jamie by first name.
Interesting. By the way, you spell your name J-A...
Yes.
J-A-M-M-I-E, which was a unique way to spell Jamie. How did that come about?
There's a story behind it. As a matter of fact, I was speaking with Dutch Mantell a couple years ago, and he was signing his book for me. He saw that I spelled double M, and he says, there's got to be a story behind this, because there's no way that a mother and father just named their kid Jamie with two M's. And there actually is. Back in 1966, when I was born, all the old wives' tales said that I was supposed to be a girl. But whatever it was, I was supposed to be a girl. So my name was supposed to be Tammy. Well, I'm due around Christmas Day, and all of a sudden in September, my mom goes into labor. And at that time, medicine wasn't as advanced as it is now. So after she gives birth and it's a baby boy, my mom was actually in a coma for 2 weeks.
Oh, my.
Because I was a preemie and everything else that was going on.
Hey, my friend. I don't want to cut you up. Welcome to the club, man. I was severely premature, 7.5 months out of the chute.
Wow.
And birth weight, 1 pound, 8 ounces.
Wow, you were really
small. God bless you. I am somewhat of a miracle baby. So anybody who tells me they were premature, I get a little choked up, because my mom always cried when she talked about how I was born and how they weren't sure the first few hours of my life whether I was going to make it or not. And I did. So I'm very grateful for all that. And, I tend to forget all that a lot, and I should, because, it just shows you what a blessing we are both to be here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was, after like a week, they started pressuring my father, hey, listen, you need to give your son a name here. We just can't live with baby Ward. We have to get birth certificates and everything all set up for you. And he says to him, well, I thought she was going to be a girl, and the name we had picked out was Tammy, Tammy. So how about Jammie, Jammie? And it stuck. And that's how I got the name.
Oh, wow. So it's
So my dad named me. My mom didn't even have a say because she was still, in her coma.
So it's not like a shortened James. That's actually your
No.
full name.
Yep, that's actually my full name. It's
Very interesting.
my given name. And then, of course, I had to bless my son with the same name, and he curses me every day for it.
Well, listen, I have the world's dullest name, so it's like I kind of envy you because it's like I'm sure you've been asked that question many times.
All through school, that first day of school, I always dreaded because it was always Jammie Ward. Jammie Ward. And I still hear it to this day. People, if they see my spelling. As a matter of fact, I was at a doctor's office yesterday, and when I was checking in, they asked what my name was, and I said Jammie Ward, and she's going through the thing. She said, "Oh, Jammie." I said, "No, Jamie." And then she gives me that look. I said, "All right, it is double M. It's not spelled wrong. That's the way it is." And then I give the quick story, like I just gave to you guys.
Yeah. The only time anybody questions my name is when I'm checking in a hotel, but that's a whole nother story. So, Bob Smith, huh? Sure, yeah, buddy. One of those deals.
I think I've used that alias a time or two.
You'd be smart.
And I didn't even know you at the time. How about that?
What else is going on? You're more than a podcaster. Can you give me a little bit of the quick story about what your wrestling life has been like?
I've been very fortunate in my wrestling life. It's like a 10-degree separation from people. I started out, as I told you, got hooked watching Prism Spectrum Wrestling. And then I started buying the magazines in like 1979. And as time progressed a little bit, I started my own newsletter. My father bought me a VCR in 1982, and I started trading tapes with different people from around the country. And then I would go into the Kaiser magazines and put an ad in there that my newsletter, which was basically WWF news that, I just grabbed it off television. Looking back, it was really one bad newsletter, but I put in there if anyone wanted to trade tapes or my newsletter, just send me a self-addressed stamped envelope. I send them the newsletter, or ask me what you wanted to trade, and we could, work out trading tapes. So that's what I did for quite a few years.
Hey, listen, don't poo-poo that. I think tape trading and wrestling magazines made my career. Because it's like I had my first VCR in either late 79 or early 80. Right around the San Martino Zbyszko feud, right around that point. And I taped everything and remembered everything. And that long time memory base you get from rewatching videotapes served me in really good stead by the time I got interviewed for PWI. I think it just, I got lucky too, because I'd been a boxing writer and I had done a lot of work with Mike Tyson or about Mike Tyson. And that really got me the job there. But if it wasn't for the VCR, I don't think I would have made it on the PWI, because I had that really good knowledge base as a tape trader, just like you were.
Right. And I had met up with one guy who lived in Hillsville, Virginia, named Larry Lawler. And Larry didn't want like my Spectrum Wrestling or anything like that, but I had Prism, and he knew that was a movie channel. So I used to trade him movies for wrestling tapes. And he would not only give me Mid-Atlantic, but somehow he was getting, he was trading for it. He would send me Portland, the world-class Fort Worth show, and Mid-South stuff, and also stuff from Japan. So now it's 1983, 84, 85. Yeah. I'm starting to get even a little more well-versed in exactly what else was out there. Around the same time, 82, 83, somebody sent me the Wrestling Observer, and I got hooked on Dave Meltzer's newsletter.
Oh, sure. I mean, Dave, I'll say it again for like the fourth time in the show. Dave gets a lot of flack lately, but there's a difference between his opinion and his news-gathering talent. He has always been a first-rate reporter of wrestling news, and nobody can take that away from him as far as I'm concerned. I think he's been, in the beginning, people lambasted him for exposing the business. People would have that opinion. Personally, I think he helped popularize the business for good or for bad through his newsletter, and I think he's done a fabulous job throughout his whole career. I don't care about his star ratings; it don't matter to me.
Now, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, Dave, at one point I had drifted away from Dave just because I was graduating high school. I was kind of drifting away from wrestling slightly. And then all of a sudden, I got one back in the mail one day from Dave where he just sent it to me out of nowhere. And I said, you know what, I'm going to resubscribe. And I sent him a money order along with a copy of my newsletter. He sent me the money order back. And for like 2 years, he actually took my newsletter in trade. That's a nice guy. I mean, considering his was 100 times better than what I was putting out there. I mean, that's a class move in my opinion. And fortunately, I did get to meet Dave on several occasions. Last time being at an ECW show in the 90s.
Oh, I spoke with him back when I was with Peter. I talked to him a lot on the phone, and I would bump into him at big events. And to me, he was always a perfect gentleman, and I really loved talking to him. I thought he was, again, he set a standard for everybody else to try to come up to, to be honest with you, because he was informing the entire wrestling world. I'll tell you this right now. We had, how many writers we have in wrestling? Between Abner, myself, and Craig Peterson. There were 6 of us who were writing wrestling when I was there, right, at the London Publishing Company. When that damn thing came out, we get it on a Monday, and we go right to the copy machine and make a copy for everybody. And we would read the thing from cover to cover during our lunch break or whatever, because we were all kind of feeding off that thing. Because for 2 reasons. Number one, it was good. Number 2 is we could get story ideas out of that thing. Or, if we could find a photographer who worked in a certain territory when he's telling about a certain feud that just started, jackpot. Right. Where else were you going to get that information all in one place?
Yeah. It's good to hear that he actually helped influence you guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think he influenced us as to what we did. We sneakily used his information to help us,
and I'm sure he
find
didn't
some
mind.
Interesting things to write about. No, I'm sure he didn't mind at all. I'm sure he knew it too.
After all, he named it the Aftermags, correct?
I do believe that's true. In fact, Bill even says that. That's right. So, listen, and here's the thing. I do believe that the advent of the newsletters around 88, 89, 90 started to erode the popularity of the traditional newsstand wrestling magazine because they had the immediacy we could never have. Because by the time we put an issue out, it would be 6 weeks until it hit the newsstand. From the time we sent it to the distributor, and it was old news by then. With the immediacy of a weekly newsletter, of course, the internet came later, but even that was way more effective at getting news to readers quickly than we could be. He would write the thing on a Friday. People would have it in their hands by Monday or Tuesday. So, it did put chunks into our business, take chunks, I should say, out of our business, because I think people switched. There's no question people switched in some regard.
Well,
were you like that too?
I can tell you that is what happened with me. I started subscribing to the Wrestler, Inside Wrestling, and in 1980, then I think Pro Wrestling Illustrated came along in 1981, and my parents were always supportive of my wrestling habit. I guess they figured I'm a teenager, and it's better than me running the streets and doing something, getting myself in trouble. So they subscribed to all 3 of those magazines for me. And then around 85, because I was back into the Observer again, there was no need because, like you said, it was 6 weeks behind. And I loved reading those magazines. But again, 6 weeks behind against instant information that was from earlier in the week.
I'm not ashamed to admit that even in the 2 or 3 years before I joined PWI in 88, I was still buying news. I was still buying the Observer, and I was still buying newsstand wrestling magazines. I just liked them. It was a habit of my whole life. My best friend in high school growing up read them. We used to eat lunch at a local diner all the time. They had a magazine rack. We would read the magazines as we were eating our cheeseburgers. I mean, it was just I was ingrained in it. I just love wrestling magazines. And I just couldn't stop. And the fact around, like I said, in 88, that I actually ended up working for one legit full time. I knew I stepped in it even then, man. It was cool. It was just a very, very lucky break for me.
Yeah, you were very lucky. You brought up Bill Apter. In the later 80s, Bill would call me every once in a while, asking me just certain questions. The one he really wanted to know was in my newsletter, Larry Lawler, who I just mentioned, he did a little section called The History of JCP from his time of watching, Mid-Atlantic back in the 70s. And Bill called me and asked me if I could give him Larry's phone number so he could talk to Larry. And I forget if he actually ever did anything with it, but hey, it was cool getting a phone call from Bill Apter. And then Bill would call me every now and then, asking me if I could put him in contact with certain people. Because much like tonight, you said other people told you that I should be on your show. People were telling Bill Apter, contact this guy, Jammie Ward. He can put you in contact with such and such. So, hey, that was an honor. And then even the bigger kicker, a couple years ago to CWF Fan Fest, Bill was there. And I met him in the hallway. I said, Mr. Apter, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name's Jammie Ward. He goes, starts shaking his finger at me. I know you from somewhere. Where do I know you? Hold on. You're a newsletter guy, and I used to call you once in a while. Boy, that's good memory, because if I can remember Bill Apter, that's a big deal. But Bill Apter remembering me, that's like one of the highlights of my life.
I can tell you right now, he's still got that memory too. He's still working. You know that? He's still out there doing it. After all these years, I guess he's working for mainly for Sportskeeda, but he's still out there. He's at the conventions. He's at the cards. He amazes me. I asked him almost 10 years ago at this point. I'm at his house in Pennsylvania. And I go, well, what are you going to do when you retire? He goes, Bob, I'm never retiring. And he never has.
Yeah, he only lives about 35, 40 minutes away from me. And when Barry Rose was living up here, we were supposed to go get pizza one time, but it never transpired. I have his phone number, but I don't want to bother the man.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's as busy now as he's ever been. I'm not even making that up. He's got his finger in so many different pies. Good for him. He's a happy camper, and I like to see it because, I guess it was 2 years ago I ran into him at a wrestling convention in Philadelphia. I didn't know he didn't know I was going to be there. It was like a home week. It was great. So I've seen him a couple times since then. He's been on the show once or twice. It's just been really cool to see my old friend. And Craig Peters, too. He lives in Pennsylvania as well now. When they moved away, PWI, they moved to Pennsylvania, and they're still there. But Craig comes to the city 2-3 times a year, and we've been able to get together with him a couple times. So it's been really cool. So do you see any old wrestling friends from the day like I do?
In person, no, not unless I go to like one of these fan fests that are outside of Philadelphia. I mean, I see some guys that I knew from back in the day attending local independent cards. All the stuff basically just through Facebook now, or we might pick up the phone and text. Another guy who the name Ron Lemieux.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. Well, Ron and we go back to actually probably a little bit before the conventions where we traded newsletters and stuff. And then we met at the UAWF conventions in the 80s. And then we reconnected sometime in the 90s when the internet started. And now we're in each other's fantasy sports leagues. And and we text each other all the time. So he's probably the one person that I'm really gotten the tightest with, from back in the day.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and it makes you feel young, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. You never know that. I've been with the post office almost 40 years. I got in when I was 18 years old. I'm getting ready to retire in a couple of months, I hope, unless things go south with the post office. But, yeah, time flies by, and it's great to catch up with guys from years ago. Now, one guy who I wish was still around today is Dennis Carluzzo.
Carluzzo, yeah.
Yeah. I had gone to Joel Goodhart and Carmella Panfill, their old wrestling radio show in Philadelphia. I went on a couple of their trips to Memphis, and the first one that I went to, I met Dennis, who was friends with Tom Robinson, had met him over in Jersey at some place. And both Tom and I, along with Frank Chili and Jeff Otto, were like the original members of the Dennis Carluzzo posse. And I spent a lot of time with Dennis from say 87 to 92. He would just pick up the phone and say, yo, dude, go over here to my house right now. We're going to watch something real cool. And he'd go over there and he'd have his 2 VCRs going and 2 TVs. And watch all this old stuff. Then we'd go out to dinner. And then Dennis would tell us, oh, I'm real good friends with Jim Cornette. Yeah, sure, Dennis. Sure you are. What it turned into where we'd go to the Philadelphia Civic Center with Dennis each time. And after the show was over, we'd go with Jim Cornette, Bobby Eaton, and whoever else was tagged along. We'd go to the Ribbit restaurant down, I think it was the Second and Chestnut in Philadelphia. And we did that for several years. And I always had a blast. Just having Cornette hold court.
I can't even imagine.
And tell all his stories. And a very similar story. When the first time I met him, he says, "Oh my God, you're Jammie Ward. I've been reading your name in the magazines for years." So that gave me a big head at the time. that Jim. And as a matter of fact, I get name dropped every now and then. Brian Last will mention something, and my name will pop up on his podcast every now and then. Which I'm nobody, but hey, I get a big head out of the deal.
I disagree. Based on what you have made your mark in an industry that's kind of hard to make a mark in, so I would be proud if I were you, because people hold you in high esteem and you're still around. And those are two things that are kind of hard to achieve. So I congratulate you on that.
I've always tried to be a nice guy in all facets of life. I've never intentionally tried to screw anybody over. Things happen once in a while, but life goes on. But yeah, I've made a lot of great friends, over the years through wrestling. And as we were just saying, some of them are still around today, and it's just great. I even had that other podcast with another good friend who's become a good friend of mine, is Ray Russell of the network here, WrestleCopia.
Mm-hmm. Ray is one hardworking, prolific when it comes to his family, as we know.
Yes.
He's a hardworking meat and potatoes guy, and the association I've had with him is very simple, but it's been seamless. I've been with the network now, I guess it's about 4 or 5 months. No problems. It's all been really, really smooth. We had one little hiccup about something, but other than that, it has been well worth the time, and I'm proud to be listed amongst all those other shows. So it's like a really cool thing.
Yeah, Ray's great. I was fortunate enough to meet him and his lovely wife last year at one of Barry Rose's Fan Fests again, and we just hit it off just like that. I now do the last 2 years, I've been doing the regional wrestling podcast with Ray, where we covered 1981 in Georgia Championship Wrestling. And that all came about when Ray one day on Facebook said he was looking for somebody to cover some territories. And I contacted him, and he knew who I was because of our mutual friend, Tom Robinson, because Tom was doing a podcast for him. And he said, "Oh yeah, that sounds great. What would you like to do?" And I said, "I can do Florida. I can do, Mid-Atlantic. I can do Georgia, whatever you want. I can brush up on, because I was really into wrestling back then." And he said, "Hey, how about we give Georgia 81 a try?" And we started in March of 2023, and we just wrapped it up last month. Almost 2 years just on Georgia 81. And the guy is impeccable. If you've never heard the Ray Russell Regional Wrestling podcast, the amount of research that he does, he has the whole format laid out for me. Like the questions he's going to ask. I don't know him ahead of time. I'm finding out in real time what he wants what kind of commentary he wants from me. Mm-hmm. And I just give it, and we go have a great back and forth. We go over every house show result, every television show. It was a little tough in the beginning because it's tough to find complete Georgia Championship Wrestling shows until maybe June of 81. But basically from that point on, they're all out there. And somehow he has master copies of this stuff, and he'll send me the shows a little bit early, and I'll go through, I'll write all my notes down, and we just have a blast when we do it. It's like a 2-hour chuckle fest. It's maybe not the most professional, on my part anyway, but we just have a blast doing it. And right now, we're just taking a little break while he's working on a couple other projects with Vandal Drummond doing LA. One of my mentors in Smart Fandom, a man named Rich Vicek, who wrote the Dick the Bruiser book, back in the early 80s. he contacted me, saw my name in a Kaiser magazine, and one day I get a package with 10 videotapes in it, and they were all from Memphis. And I don't even know this gentleman at this point, and it's a real nice note. Hey, I can tell that you're a big wrestling fan. I wanted you to have these, but please send them back to me, but no rush. And then he introduced me to some other stuff, newsletters and things of that type. And Rich was a real mentor for me back there in the early 80s when it came to being a smart fan, as we used to say. And so anyway, I keep getting off track here. I'm sorry, Bob.
No, it's fine. You're telling me things I don't know. Let me ask you something.
Apparently.
One thing I'm happy about is my memory is still good. How's your memory after all the matches and all the big events and all the conventions and everything else that happens in your wrestling life? Are you still good at reeling off little anecdotes about the past? I'm finding it's a little harder, but I'm still, I'm not great with dates, but I'm really good with moments. How's your
I
memory?
agree. I agree with that. I mean, I can't spit out the date of Flair Sting in 1989 anymore. Like at the Great American Bash, which I sat with Jim Cornette's wife, with Dennis Carluzzo and Frank Chili, and behind us was Jim Hurd and another TBS exec, where Dennis was just putting over how courageous Jim Cornette was wrestling on one knee against Paulie Dangerously. Another story, another time. But but yeah, my memory is pretty decent. It's probably from being a mailman, learning all the names of my customers, and it has kept my memory pretty sharp. I'm 58. I'm getting ready to turn 59. I'm not as quick as I used to be. None of us are. But a lot of times like when I do that podcast with Ray, something will just snap in my head, and I'll be able to whip off a bunch of information about what I saw in Georgia Championship Wrestling that day, or other things that are associated with that. So the memory's not as great as it once was, but it's still there.
It must work because there you are, still communicating to all the people out in podcast land. Here's something I got to ask another veteran fan, just like I am. The changes in wrestling from decade to decade, from year to year. Today's product kind of barely resembles what I used to watch when I first started. I'm sure it's the same way for you. How do you feel about the passage of time and what wrestling is today as compared to when you were growing up?
I think it's probably just as good. Of course, everybody remembers and romances over their childhood memories. I mean, I thought baseball was great when I first started watching baseball at the age of 6 in 1972. And I can spit out that stuff, a lot of stuff that happened in the 70s and 80s with baseball. So it's kind of like the same thing with wrestling. But, as time goes on, I kind of got turned off in the 90s when Vince kind of went full character mode, and you have the dirty white boy coming in as TL Hopper and Bill Irwin as the Goon. I kind of started drifting away at that point. Plus, I had just gotten married, and we just had our first child. So I kind of drifted away from wrestling. But then ECW came along, and here it was in my backyard. And I'm watching these shows on did it start on Prism? No, it started on Sports Channel, Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And a couple guys that I worked with, they were watching it also. And I didn't even know they were wrestling fans. And then we just started going down to the arena every month. And that kind of got me back into it. And then the whole Monday Night Wars, that got me back into it. I would have 2 VCRs going, record each show, because I probably wasn't watching them live because we were putting our daughter to bed or stuff like that. And I would watch them back during the week, fast forward through most of the matches. And even today, I've maintained watching the product all the way through, from way back when. And if it's something I don't care to watch, I'll just fast forward through it. But I always try to listen to the interviews, because I think even though a lot of the interviews are scripted today, I think some of them are actually can compete with back in the territory days when it was totally unscripted and they were just going out there on bullet points and doing it. I mean, CM Punk is just as good as anybody from back in the day.
Absolutely. You make a good point. And maybe you'll agree with this, maybe you're wrong, but this is how I feel about it. I don't care if an interview is scripted or pre-planned or anything like that. But if the wrestler doesn't display a little bit of his or her real self in their character, it never works. When they do, For instance, look at Steve Austin, look at CM Punk, look at some of the great orators, look at The Rock. When a little bit of themselves comes out in who they're portraying in their wrestling character is when they become massive successes. Do you agree with that or no?
I agree 100% with that, Bob. They need to, and I believe now that Vince is gone, that they are trying to stress that, because even if you look at the NXT product, which I try to record every week and do the same thing, I'll blow through the matches unless it looks like it's going to be a good match, and I'll listen to the interviews, and you can tell which ones need help and which ones are going to make it someday, just with their interview styles, because they're letting their own personalities enter into the character, and that's what is needed. I mean, let's go back. Terry Funk was crazy, and Terry Funk scared the hell out of me as a kid. Terry Funk scared the hell out of me the first time I met him.
Terry Funk scared the hell out of me, both at ringside and backstage on separate events, because when that light went on, he was Terry Funk. He wasn't playing. It wasn't something he switched on and off. It took him a long time. He's like a dog that's been over-exercised a little bit. I don't know if this makes any sense, but when he was on, when the spotlight was on him, he was the Terry Funk. Of course, if you saw him a couple hours later, he would be the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. But he gave me the evil eye at one match because I got knocked over at one point at ringside. It wasn't supposed to be part of the deal. I saw him yelling at a woman backstage in Connecticut. I think it was New Haven Coliseum, and berating this woman, and Gary Hart's with him going, "Why are you yelling at her?" "Because she tried to bite me, Gary." The woman is horrified, right? But that was Terry, right? I mean, he was what you saw on television from the minute he stepped out of that dressing room to the minute he went back, and he wasn't fooling around.
Yeah. Can I tell a Terry Funk story?
Please do, because I can't get enough of Terry Funk. Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, this involves Terry Funk, Jerry Lawler, Jim Cornette, and Stacy Carter. Dennis Carluzzo holds the Tom Robinson benefit show when Tom was sick, and I helped, sell tickets. I did a lot of stuff for Dennis for that show. Well, that day he had me pick up Jerry Lawler and his girlfriend at the Philadelphia airport. So I pick them up, and we have a nice conversation. I take them to the hotel. I have lunch with them. We talk and everything. Fast forward to the show later in the evening. Stacy's backstage, and she doesn't know a person there except for Jerry and myself. And I'm walking back and forth out of the dressing room doing whatever I'm doing, and she comes over to me and grabs me by the arm and says, "Hey, Jammie, will you just sit down here and talk to me for 5 or 10 minutes? Because I don't know anybody here, and everybody won't talk to me." I said, "Oh, yeah, sure." So we're sitting there talking. And the next thing I hear is this big bang. And it's Jerry Lawler yelling, "Where is he?" And I'm not thinking. And well, Jim Cornette, who's standing a few feet away, goes, "Jammie, you better run, because I think Jerry Lawler's talking about you." And I said, "Talking about me? Well, you're not supposed to be talking to her. Nobody talks to her backstage." And here comes Lawler. You son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you." And I take off. And who grabs me but Terry Funk? "Jerry, I got him right over here." That's a poor Terry Funk imitation. Jerry, Jerry, I got him right over here. I got that for you. He ain't going to get away. Come on over and beat the out of him. So Jerry starts coming at me. Terry grabs me by my two shoulders and is pushing me at him. And all of a sudden, Jerry stops. He starts laughing, and Terry Funk starts patting me on the back. "I bet your pants, didn't you, boy?" So
they were both ribbing you guys?
All three of them were ribbing me.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Happened. I'm not sure, but Stacy jumps off the chair, and she goes over and she starts hitting Jerry. "Why would you do that to him? He's a nice guy. Why would you punish him like that?" And then she took him off, and I guess yelled at him some more, because the next night Dennis had another show. Jerry wasn't on that one, but Eddie Gilbert and Terry Funk were. And Terry walked up to me. "Hey, I'm sorry, son, but welcome to professional wrestling."
Wow. That's a good one. That's some stuff right there.
That's probably the highlight of my whole entire wrestling fandom right there.
That's so little part of wrestling history there. That's for sure. Yeah, she's a nice lady. They were very, very cordial to me when I was hanging out. The 2 times I went to Memphis to see them. So, great memories, man. Yeah, I always talk on the show about. I spent a week in Memphis in '91, just kind of touring with them. Hanging out in a car, literally, and driving to various arenas and stuff like that. It was a thrill a minute. A lot of talent back then, and it was really a lot of fun. So, and I miss those days. I miss. One thing about working at PWI, you would have loved this. We got tapes supplied from everybody. You name the federation, we had the tapes in the office a couple days after they aired, and it was just magic. It was, I like writing about the territories better than anything else. I didn't want to write about Hulk Hogan. Everybody else was doing that. I want to write about Dr. Tom Pritchard. I wanted to write about, Nightmare Danny Davis or, Randy Rose, anybody. I want to write about anybody but the big stuff, because the big stuff I didn't like anymore. I wasn't enjoying the WWF at that point, with Papa Shango and all that stuff.
And it was kind of special when you get into that time period that you're talking about, to hear about this other stuff, because WWF and even NWA to a little lesser extent, they just flooded the market. So it was a pleasure to hear about or see another promotion.
And I don't even know if you realize, I was actually part of the original Eastern Championship Wrestling, and I hosted their first few shows on cable access network Channel 7 in Philadelphia, along with Todd Gordon, which nobody ever saw. But I did it, and Todd and I have been like really good friends ever since that time. One of the cool things is Joey Styles was working in our offices as an intern.
Oh, wow.
And I know that Joey came up to the office, and he either met Paul Heyman there or connected with him there. And before I knew it, he was the host of ECW TV. And I've never been so happy to step away from something in my life than when Joey got the job, because he certainly proved his worth as one of the really good wrestling announcers of that era. So I was very happy about that.
Did your shows ever, the ones that you recorded, did they ever make the cable access?
You know what's really
because
fun?
I used to get a half-hour feed of that show on what was called the Suburban Cable local network. I forget what the exact name of it, but it was a half-hour show.
Right. Mm-hmm. They all, I think I did the first 6. I mean, and they continued to do them after that. And it's back when they were running Michael Jack Schmidt's bar, is that right?
Yes.
And then they did the Chestnut Cabaret and places like that. 1 or 2 of them have ended up on YouTube. Somebody wrote to me and told me you can see it on YouTube. But here's something even funnier. I was on the WWE Network doing play-by-play when somebody dubbed an old VHS tape of early ECW's called Their Bloodiest Battles or something, and it ended up on the WWE Network in the Hidden Gems section. They used to have a section called Hidden Gems.
Yeah.
I had never seen those tapes. And those cards, when I was doing play-by-play, inspired me to say, Todd, I ain't got it. You can do better than me. I thought I sucked. Right. I did. Man must know his limitations, like Clint Eastwood said. So after 30 years, I'm watching these tapes. I'm going, that really wasn't awful. He never would have let me go. Todd told me recently he never would have let me go. I could have stayed in that role forever. I didn't think I didn't think I had the right, voice to be a full announcer. He thought I did fine. I had no idea. So
you could have been worse than Jay Sully.
He keeps hearing that. Jay was all right. Here's the deal. The right guy got the job. In Joey Styles.
In the end, yes.
The right guy got the job.
Joey's phenomenal.
Let me tell you something. He walked into our offices as an intern. He knew much about wrestling as anybody that worked there. And he must have been in his late 20s, maybe.
Okay.
Knew as much about wrestling as anybody I met in the Philly area. He was just great. Just great.
I mean, I was very disappointed when he didn't work out as the announcer on Monday Night Raw. Whatever went on behind the scenes that led to that, it was a shame because I love Joey Styles. And I thought he was perfect for Monday Night Raw.
I try to visualize that whole era, and it just blurs in my mind at this point because they went through so many permutations, so many different styles. WWF is going. I frankly think they're better now than they have been in a long, long time. I enjoy a lot of what they do. I mean, who doesn't like Gunther? I mean, come on. I mean, there's some wrestling going on in there. And it's not all over the top stuff. There's some really good matches going on.
And the talent level they have right now is very reminiscent of the Attitude Era, where guys like Triple H and The Rock and Stone Cold all came from that mid card up to superstardom. And they have a lot of guys like that now. You know, your Seth Rollins, your Roman Reigns, even Jimmy Uso. These guys have just, elevated. And like you said, Gunther is, for me, is like the highlight of the night. I'm disappointed he doesn't come down with that cape anymore, because I love the way he used to whip it off, and then Ludwig Kaiser would spin that cape around.
Yeah, they
the visual was great.
Yeah, it was. They seem to have separated them. But you know what? Kaiser's opening my eyes too. He can go. And I like anybody that can go. I don't care what size they are, what their personalities are. I bet he could do an hour match if he felt like it. He's in such great physical condition that I think he may be their diamond in the rough there. I don't think they know what to do with him quite, but I think every time I see him, he puts on a great match.
And the more microphone time they give him, he's improving each time. Plus, he looks like $1 million when you put him out there. He looks better than Austin Theory does, body-wise.
I guess. I never think of things in those terms, but it's like,
I try to look at the total package when I watch wrestling anymore. Do they have the look? Do they have the abilities? And can they talk?
Right.
And he has check marks in all three boxes there.
Well, let's put it this way. He's got the old 1967 Baron Mikel Cicluna thing going on. Because Cicluna never talked a lot, but in his prime, he would just walk out of the curtain and sneer. Ludwig Kaiser walks out of the curtain and sneers. And everybody hates him for the minute his face shows up on the TV screen. He's got that look about him, that I am better than you. I'm a better wrestler than everybody else. He just puts his arms behind his back and does that look. Wrestling loves guys like that. Wrestling fans love to hate guys like that. And that's a skill, I always talk about the tool factor. Oh, I can't stand that Logan Paul. You know why you can't stand him? Because he's a great tool. Nobody wants to hang out with a guy like that. That's why everybody hates him, and that's why they buy tickets to see him get beat. It's in that way, wrestling hasn't changed since the 50s.
Yeah, my dad wasn't the biggest wrestling fan in the world, but both him and my mom, like I said, fully supported my wrestling habit. And my mom watched TBS with me every Saturday night, and my dad was there. He was a wedding photographer, so if he was home, he was watching with me. And he hated Ric Flair. You always want to see Ric Flair, get his ass kicked. And we went to the Great American Bash in Philly in '86 at Veterans Stadium, and Hawk pinned Ric Flair. And my dad must have jumped like 5 feet into the air. And I had to put my hand on his shoulder and said, Dad, just calm down for just a moment. Just wait. And it was a dusty finish where they take the belt away from Hawk because the deaf referee came in. And he was so disappointed.
I believe it.
But actually, I probably get my love of wrestling through him, kind of, because back in the 1950s, he lived in Wilmington, Delaware. He was not friends, but friendly with Jesus Calhoun. Calhoun would come into the same diner that my dad would eat at. Mm-hmm. And they were, friendly enough that they knew each other's names and, to say hello. And my dad said he'd be eating his breakfast, and Calhoun would come in and order 6 breakfasts. And,
I don't know why I'm laughing, because he had to maintain that weight. So, you don't get that big, eating cornflakes.
Right.
Put it that way. The thing I love best about wrestling is the wrestling psychology, what makes wrestling work. And you were talking about Ric Flair. I think about the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. In that, you go back to the 50s and 60s, people hated his guts, not because he cheated, but simply because he was arrogant and cocksure and full of himself, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In a more subtle way than they do now, it was the same exact thing. And when you have that gift to make people really go, I want to see this guy get beat, that's the wrestling psychology. That's the stuff that I get excited about, learning about, and discovering, how they all did it. When you think of your joy for professional wrestling like I do, with me, it's watching it all unfold and watching everything work like that. Are you into that too, or is there something else about wrestling that took you over and made you a lifelong fan?
Yeah, I just like I wanted to know how it worked.
Right.
And was it real? Wasn't it real? And then when I, started getting the Observer and everything, I started figuring everything out, and then making friends like Rich Vicek and others. And then I finally got to understand it and, appreciate it. And then when I started meeting wrestlers later in the 80s, it made me appreciate even more exactly what they do and how they go about it to make us believe, give us something to either cheer for or give us something to have disdain for. Normal human emotions, but take them to that next level. And it just hooked me. And then, like I said, Dennis introduced me to Jim Cornette, and that led to Bob Eaton, who without a doubt, the number one nicest
Absolutely.
person in the sport of wrestling that I had ever met. Just pure class. I used to Dennis would take Cornette back, and then I would usually back to their hotel, and I would usually drive Bobby Eaton back. And I never tried to talk wrestling with the guys. As a matter of fact, when we were at those Rivet things, I more or less just sat there because I figured my place is I'm not on their level when it comes to trying to talk. I would just like take it all in. So when I would ever have like Bobby Eaton or other wrestlers that I'm driving back, I didn't want to talk wrestling. I'd bring up something else. And Bobby Eaton ended up telling me he was a big football fan and a Green Bay Packer fan of that. So we always talked NFL anytime I was around Bobby. And he was just a real wonderful man, real sweetheart of a guy.
I continue to insist. I've met a lot of people, have done a lot of things in the wrestling business, but I will say there was a night in St. Louis after a pay-per-view. For some reason, I ended up sitting next to Bobby Eaton. We're talking for a while, quite a while. And he goes, "Hey, man, you're good people." And I'm like, man. And, discovering that everybody else in the world felt the same way about Bobby Eaton, to have him say that I was good people is a wonderful compliment. And he may have been one of the 10 greatest guys ever to put on a pair of boots. When in terms of just technical ability in the ring, there's nothing he couldn't do. And what a loss it is that he's not with us anymore. But at least we have the miracle videotape and all those great memories, right? What will we do without it?
Yeah. And you know what? For as great as a wrestler he was a better man.
Yeah, he really was. I've never heard anybody say anything remotely like a bad word of Bobby Eaton. It's impossible.
No, they all love Bobby Eaton.
It's a real Southern gentleman, right? And I know another gentleman. He's looking at me right now. His name is Jammie Ward. Let me give you the floor. Tell people where they can find you on social media, anything you're working on, any podcast you're doing. You have the floor. Please hype yourself so people will find you out there.
Well, if you want to find me, you can go to just about any wrestling Facebook group. John McAdams Stick to Wrestling Facebook group or his Pro Wrestling and Whatever Facebook group. You can find me in Breaking Kayfabe with Baldwin and Barry. And of course, the Othership Facebook group, which I highly recommend you check out because it's all a great bunch of guys. Just reach out to me. You can send me a direct message. I'll answer you back. I'm pretty public. I'm not hiding from anybody for anything. So, so reach out to me. I have no problem with that. You can hear me the week before and the week after every WWE. What do they call them now, Bob? PLEs?
Right. PLEs. That's right.
I'm on the Othership along with Michael Herrick and Drew Samuels, Chris Spiker, and William Merriweather for all those episodes before and after a PLE, or even like a Saturday night's main event. We'll preview those. Upcoming shortly, I'll be on Ray Russell's Regional Wrestling Podcast, in which we will start our 1982 Georgia Championship Wrestling year in review. And that's the year of Flair Backlund, for those that are not familiar with that. So we'll be covering that in depth. I'll be on an upcoming episode of Stick to Wrestling. I won't give it away what we're going to be talking about yet, but you can catch me on that. This week, I was also on an episode of Brian Trammell's Shooting the Shiznit. So, yeah, I get around when it comes to podcasts. I've been on the 605 podcast back in the early days of it. I've been on Stick to Wrestling 15, 16 times. As a matter of fact, Bob, here's one I definitely know you don't know. I'm probably the only person in the world that has had lunch with Steve Gennarelli, my main man, and Johnny McAdam.
Oh, my gosh, you may be.
I've had lunch with both of them. I've known John since back in the 80s, back to the UAWF conventions. And we traveled the road with Dennis Caroluzzo a time or two. And I've known Steve's name through, the Wrestling Observer newsletter way back when from the letter section. So it was a pleasure to finally meet Steve a couple years ago after going back and forth. So, hey, if you have a podcast and you want Jammie Ward on it, just contact me. Not that I have a big head or anything. I really don't, but I do enjoy doing things like this. And like I said, I was just so overwhelmed. And I'm not just saying that, Bob, when you asked me to be on your podcast, because this is, great. I love listening to your podcast. Do I listen to everyone? I'd be lying if I said I did, because there's just only so much time out there to listen
That's right.
to so many podcasts. So I just really appreciate you having me on tonight.
No sweat. And I'll tell you what, first of all, Bobby Eaton, Steve Generelli, right? Two classic dudes. That's all I got to say.
Absolutely.
And secondly, I'm never going to complain again, because it's like I am wearing myself to a nub. I do this in another podcast called the Outdated Entertainment Hour, and I
have heard.
And I am chief cook and bottle washer. I do everything, including the editing and the audio and everything. I love it. I love the nuts and bolts of putting this thing out, because it's, you know what? I was in publishing all these years. I was in publishing from the early 80s to 2021, right? And I love taking something and making something out of it. This is the same, only it's not with words, it's with audio. But I happen to have been a musician for a while, so I was good with sound and I knew how to edit things. So after we're done, I will take probably 4 to 6 hours on this podcast to make sure it comes out. It sounds as good as it possibly can, So I'm wearing myself out, but I wouldn't do it any other way. I'm a kind of a perfectionist in that regard. If that makes any sense. But the point I'm trying to make is I'm not going to complain. You just rattled off a list of guest appearances I could never keep up with. So you must be doing something right. I'll tell you that. I mean, I guess you're the guest everybody loves.
Hey, I love doing it. I'm not a lead guy. I don't think I could ever host my own podcast, but I love coming on, just talking wrestling or just talking in general. I just love to do it. And part of that comes from being a mailman. When you're a mailman, you also play amateur psychologist a lot of times, with your customers, especially when you've had the same route for years. I've had my last route for the last 10 years. Before that, I had a route for like 15 years. And then I did a lot of jumping around. I have almost 40 years in the post office.
Wow. You must be in great shape. I bet you're in great shape, aren't you? I mean,
I don't know about that, but
just in terms of having your energy.
Well, however, I just had my physical last week, and I see my doctor once a year, and he tells me I'm the healthiest fat guy he knows.
Oh gosh, I won't go there. As far as where myself goes,
all my numbers are pretty good. So
yeah, me too. But I'm thinking I'm not going to knock on this wood right here, because I think I'm pretty lucky. In any event, will you come back? Let's find a topic and we'll talk again. How's that sound?
Hey, you name the time, and I'll try to make it work.
You got it, my friend. This is Jammie Ward. This has been a real pleasure. I'm glad you finally made the rounds my way. This has really been a lot of fun, and good health, good success. Keep it going. I'll listen to you. I'm sure you're going to listen to me from time to time, and we will talk again. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you again, Bob. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with the elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. Well, once again, I want to thank my co-host, Joe Puccio, who's making the show bigger and brighter all the time, and our guest tonight, the one and only Jammie Ward. Write to us, please. OutdatedWrestling@gmail.com. OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com is our website. All of our shows are there. Bang. We're also part of the WrestleCopia podcast network at WrestleCopia.com. You can find many of our episodes right there. So check out not only our podcast, but a lot of others at WrestleCopia.com. Find me on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith that sings with BB King, or sang, I should say. Really did. Did it a bunch of times. It's great memories that I will never forget. I'll tell you that much. We also have a fan club on our website. You want to check that out too. And I'm going to get out of here because we've done a lot of yakking, and you're probably tired of hearing my voice at this point, like everybody else on the planet. Anyway, my name is Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We will see you next time. And until then, like Ringo says, peace and love, brothers and sisters. Especially now, guys. Peace and love.